Coming up on episode 192 of Creative Writing, I'm talking about big launches versus low-key launches.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. This is the podcast for you, an author who wants to sell more books without being smarmy. And I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant. I am so glad you're here, whether it's your first or 192nd. I always want to say the wrong number, like 192th time I almost said that. And now I did say it, so you know what's going on in my brain. I'm glad you're here, and I hope you stick around despite my lack of affinity for numbers. Today I'm going to talk about big book launches versus low-key book launches, and I'm thankful to everybody who voted in the Facebook community. If you're not in there, it's a really great community of people. We don't just sit around and promote each other's stuff, but really help each other out. And it has, I would like to say that it has some of the best mojo around, just in terms of people being sweet and kind, mostly because I banish them if they're not. So if that sounds like a place you want to be, head over to creativewriting.com/community and it'll take you to the group. But I ran a quick poll and there are people who wanted to hear about going wide versus going into Kindle Unlimited. And I will talk about that. But I'm really excited to talk about launching today, which was by far the popular vote because I'm actually about to launch another book, and I launched one 2 weeks ago, and I'll be launching one next month. So I have a lot to say about book launches, and I'm going to give you guys not one way to do this because I typically, unless there like literally is a right way or a law or some kind of unbreakable thing about something, I want to give you guys options and then help you decide within the framework of your goals, which is the best for you. And that might be big launches, it might be low-key launches. If you want to find the show notes for the episode, which is really like a meaty blog post that has lots of words, not just bullet points, and all the links I'm talking about, you can go to creativewriting.com/192 for episode 192. So let's talk about big launches versus low-key launches and what that even means. And I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts again lately because now that my kids are back in in-person school, I can listen to voices again. I feel like for months with everybody at home, I had so many voices. I just was like, podcasts are more voices, no more voices. Extreme introvert here, dying. But I started listening to some again, and I was listening to a few different people talk about launches. And I thought that I would just address this because I heard some talk about launches and how they have to be a certain way. And that led me to want to talk about how they can be several different ways. And having done several different kinds of launches and all kinds of things over the past 2 or so years, 2.5 years, I have some, I've seen some different things and what's worked and what hasn't for me, and also watched this for other authors. So here we go. And I want to start with talking about a big book launch and what that really means. And then I'll talk about low-key launches, and then we'll discuss kind of why you might choose one versus the other. And then I'm going to give you some parting words that I hope are encouraging either way. So the idea of big book launching, it comes from traditional publishing and basically modern history of book publishing. It's how book launching has been done. And it's really, for the most part, how it's still done for traditionally published books. And there are a lot of indies who choose this method. And basically what I mean by a big book launch when I'm talking about this is that everything is centered and focused around having all your ducks in a row and everything that first day and week and really doing a huge push right around the time of launch or the day of launch. And I would hazard a guess that if you are publishing and maybe newer to publishing, this may have been the way you have always done it. And again, I'm not saying one way is right or wrong. So just hear me say that as I describe the different things in each launch. But this is traditionally the way it's been done. And I think when we think of a launch, this is how we think of it. So it means maybe you've got your print book ready as well as the ebook. You might have already sent out print copies if you're doing that. I don't send print review copies, but I am going to probably send some to Bookstagrammers for some of my launches that are coming up. So maybe you've already done that. You might have the audio version ready so that every single thing is ready, capital R ready, on that very first day. So it all goes live and boom, big explosion. You've been building your platform. You've been priming your readers. You might have had countdown graphics like day 1 or 4 more days, 3 more days. You maybe had a big cover reveal party. You might have created Facebook events. You might have promotions stacked. You have ads running. You have Facebook parties and takeovers scheduled, all focused on that first day or week. So when it comes time for your big launch, that first day, you've got all these things booked, scheduled, planned, and you spend at least a day or several days online, or maybe you have a personal assistant that's online, checking comments, checking rankings, you're hitting refresh on, Amazon's reports or book report or reader links or whatever you use. You're checking to see if your review team put the reviews up, and you're refreshing to read all those reviews. You're on social media, constantly talking about it. You're posting in Facebook groups. You're telling everyone and anyone and their mother's brother to read your book and celebrating the rank. And with my very, very, very first book that I put out myself, which was a devotional book for Christmas called Make Him Room, I did this. And it was very exciting. This was I think 2013, so way back there. And had I only continued to do self-publishing back then, it was very exciting. And I'd never done it before in my rank. I got some big people to share. And so my rank went crazy, and I was sharing screenshots all the time of, seeing my book ahead of some really big Christian authors. Because I used my blogging, people that I knew that wanted to share. Anyway, it was a big deal. And it was constant, here's my thing, just so much excitement. And I know for your very first launch, that tends to be how it is, all the excitement. And that is not a bad thing. Whether you choose big or low key, having excitement about your own launch really can help your promotions not seem so promote-y. They'll seem more like, I'm celebrating, you're invited to celebrate with me. And so I do think that's just a tip I'm just sliding in here, that your excitement about your launch helps your buy my book posts not be buy my book posts, because you're celebrating and you're inviting other people to join in. Okay, back into this. So you've done all these things and you're focusing on that first day and first week. You may or may not be sleeping. You're finding issues and trying to put out fires really quickly. It's exhausting. It's exhilarating. It's your party. You can laugh or cry if you want to. And then you might go into a coma and sleep for a week afterwards because of all the details. Now, you can still do a big book launch without a lot of money. I talked about ads and promos and all these different things. You can still do all these things, and your focus just might be more things like Facebook groups, Facebook parties, and lower cost promotions. But the point of a big book launch is you're trying to make a big splash on that first day or first week. And again, this is how a lot of people still do it. It's how traditional publishing tends to do it, is putting a whole lot of effort right there on launch and having everything perfect on that first day, or as perfect as it can be. We all know that the most perfect thing, there's always that one reviewer or one person on my art team who emails me on the day of launch with a giant glaring typo that I'm could you have brought this to my attention yesterday? Okay, so that's a big book launch is how it looks, is the focus of all that attention is on that first day. So low-key book launches. Low-key book launch is one that is not necessarily focused on that first day or first week of a book launch. It's not about a huge spike or explosion. And the Writing Gals have a great video that I'm linking to in the show notes on their YouTube channel about launches, where Victorine Liesk, who is a USA Today and New York Times bestseller, talks about how she actually focuses on having a steady sales up to day 10 is her focus day. I'm not going to get that specific and talk about that. And I haven't really, done my research the way maybe she did with her books and watching specific days. But the idea of a slow launch is you're doing all those same things, but you're being a little bit more spread out with them. You're not necessarily doing them all on one particular day. And there are several reasons for this. Authors will still talk about the fact that sometimes when Amazon sees a spike in sales, they think that it's either a big promotion like a BookBub or something like that, and they kind of ignore it. Or I haven't had this happen, and it's been a while since I've heard it talked about, but for a while, sometimes they might shut things down. I've actually heard of books being shut down because a big spike made them think it was bots. I feel like that was more of an issue a couple of years ago, because I haven't heard authors complain about it, and I never saw it. That was just anecdotal. But there are reasons sometimes to avoid those big spikes, because slow and steady growth and continued growth in sales kind of send signals to Amazon that it's not just one ad, but people are really enjoying your book. And that might help them start to do more organic promotion, because they do recommend books in different ways and different times and emails and all kinds of ways all over the place. And if we can, it's kind of a mystery. But basically, if Amazon feels like a book will sell and is doing well, they will promote it for you. And it's, you don't ever know when it's going to happen or how. But Victorine's point in that video was that Amazon seeing just one big spike is not going to pay as much attention as if they're seeing a lot of steady growth, maybe leading up to a bigger day in a steady way. So I'm not going to focus on a specific day, but LowKey book launch, you're doing a lot of those same things, or all of those same things: the Facebook groups, the emailing, the review copies, the posting on social media, all of that, but you're not necessarily doing it on one day. And the biggest thing for me about these two differences is sort of the mental game, because I think, and I'll get into this more in a second on why you should choose which one, but I think that there is so much pressure put on the big launch that there's an excitement and exhilaration, like I said, but it can also lead to kind of an exhaustion and a stress and pressure. And then if your book launch doesn't do as well as you want it to that first week, you might really suffer mentally. I mean, that just is a really hard blow to focus. So the LowKey book launch is not focused specifically on that first day or week. So let's talk about who should do which one. How do you choose which one? And again, neither one is, I would say, correct. I have heard people say that one is correct over the other. Just, I'm telling you that there's permission for you to do a lot of things and try things for yourself. When you're trying to make the decision about doing a big book launch versus a LowKey launch, here are some of the things you want to consider, just factors to take into consideration. What point are you at in your author career? Are you a newbie author? Is this your very first book? Have you put out dozens of books already? That's something to think about. Do you have money to invest? And how much money do you have to invest? What are your goals with the book launch? Is your goal to make a big splash? Is your goal to hit a bestseller list? Is your goal to just get your book out into the world and start selling copies? You need to think about your goals. How often do you publish? I think for me, this is kind of the bottom line for this decision. And so it's a really important thing for you to think about is how many books are you putting out a year? How frequently are you putting them out? And then your mental state. As I just mentioned before, there is a lot more stress associated with a big book launch where all the pressure is put on that first week. And it can feel like if you aren't making the sales that first week, that your launch is a failure. And that really just isn't the case. Even if you're choosing a big book launch and your first week stinks, you are not a failure. And that does not mean your book is a failure. More on that later. So if you're choosing, those are the factors you should take in. Point in your author career that you're at, the money you have, the goals, how often you publish, and your mental state and what you can handle. I feel like big launches tend to work best for traditional publishing because there's a whole lot of money, a whole lot of planning, a whole lot more time and everything else that goes into putting that laser focus on the early days. And not to say that they put everything on that first week, but just there's a lot more riding, I think, on that very first day and week. This is the best. Big launches are best for you if you're not putting out that many books a year. Maybe, 3 to 4 books a year, like a book a quarter or less. I think that big launches can be very important because you need, it's just helpful. You don't have as many books coming out and you're able to give it the focus to do that big launch. Because when people are trying to do this big launch with this, getting all the things done in this timely manner and they're publishing books really frequently, that is just a recipe for burnout really quickly. So I think it helps if your books are spread apart. And you really need that big splash in some ways because you're not putting out as many books. And so I think sometimes those big launches can work best for fewer books. When you have the time and the money, and so again, this has to do with, it relates closely, I guess, to how frequently you publish, as if you have the time and the money. And like I said, you can bootstrap a big splash launch, but you're not going to have you're not going to make that big of a spike if you don't have some money to invest. That's just kind of the way of publishing these days. And if your goal is to hit a list, if your goal is to really have that big splash, to see a spike in rank, like there are just some people who really want to have that perfect launch day. That's just really important. I'd ask you why, just make sure there's a reason, right? Why does it feel important to you? Because I think when I came over to indie publishing after coming from an MFA background and more of a traditional background, I had a lot of ingrained beliefs and sort of mindset things that had to do with traditional publishing. And indie publishing has just changed the way publishing works. And it really, at least for indies, like the way that we can publish, the freedoms we have are just really different. We don't have to make the same exact choices that traditional publishers make. We can take what works from the past and the history and what they've done, and we can make our own path. And so I feel like the slow launch idea really is indies adjusting to that. So if you're going to do a low-key slow launch, this tends to be indie. I don't know that I've heard of a traditional publisher intentionally doing this. I've heard of books suddenly becoming a big deal way after they're published. And that's just usually like a happy accident where something happens. But this tends to be an indie thing, doing a more low-key launch. This is something to do if you're doing a lot of books a year. So I launch, as I said, I launch about a book a month. I am totally the slow, low-key launch. In fact, I actually, one time last year, I had a book launch and it was from a pre-order. So like when the date hit, it just published. And I forgot, like I think someone emailed me and said like, congratulations on your launch. And I was like, oh, yes, this is correct. My book launched today. And that's too low key, y'all. I mean, it's fine. Like everything was fine. I have no complaints really necessarily about my launches, except for there's a few launches, but that was not to do with slow or fast. It was just like cover choices and all that kind of stuff. So if you're doing more books a year, low key launch is the way to go. If you have you can do this with lots or little money. The same thing with big launches. I feel like big launches, you might need to have more money focused on that, but I think it's a little bit easier to bootstrap with low key. But either way, I really would recommend having some money to invest. And I think for low key, again, the mental state, if it's going to break you to have a launch week where there's all that pressure and it may or may not go the way you want, and you may not hit those benchmarks that you put up for yourself, then maybe the low-key launch is the way to go. Because again, the time I had the book launch and someone reminded me my book was out, all I did was like say, oh yeah, my book is out. And I went and checked my rank, and then I went and did the things I should have scheduled ahead of time. And who knows why I didn't, but I hadn't. So I emailed the review team and I emailed my people, but I didn't do it with panic because who cares about day one? I often don't have my print books ready by day one because I'm launching so quickly that sometimes I don't have the final page count to give my designer to do the print cover. So I don't have those print books out. And I haven't made, sending out print copies ahead of time as an ARC something that's a priority for me. I haven't ever done it. I'm about to do it for the first time, but I'm still doing it in a low key way. I'm going to be utilizing some bookstagrammers and we'll see how that goes. So these are where low key works better for you. But I think ultimately it might come down to how many books you publish a year and then your mental state, because I think that should be a priority. And if you thrive on that excitement of the big launch, then that may be a thing for you. That makes me nuts. So it's not my thing. But I want to leave you with some encouraging thoughts on this, because really whichever launch you choose is fine. And if your launch, whichever one you choose, fails, guess what? That's still not a failure. And there are a few reasons for this. The first is that we need to look at the big picture. You are probably not, whether you've realized this or not, you're probably not just putting out a book. You are establishing an author career. Now, there are exceptions. I know a few people who are like, I just have this one book I want to write. That's cool. But here's the other thing, okay? Even taking outside of the, account of the author career, the big long-term goal, your book is like an asset and it doesn't end when launch ends. Your book absolutely can sell more and more and more copies over time. And I have found, so I've talked about this before, but one of my series, my Standover Beach series, which I started 2.5 years ago, it didn't do as well as some of the later books I published. And so I actually kind of took those as like a labor of love, published every so often. And I had super fans for them, but they never sold as much as like my Billionaires or my Rock Stars or some of the more tropey things. If Small Town Beach Romance, it just didn't sell as well. That is actually working really well right now, is Small Town Beach Romance and women's fiction beach books. And so with new covers, these books have made more this year. In fact, one of my books that I just had a book bub on, the fourth book in the series, Standover Beach Christmas, just sold like 3,500 copies in a week. And it's been out for almost a year. So your book is an asset that doesn't end at the end of launch. Now, people do talk about Amazon having like a 30-day cliff and a 60-day cliff and a 90-day cliff, where after those periods, your book just tends to fall in the rankings. And I don't know enough about algorithms and all the things to tell you whether that is by, not by design necessarily, but just sort of the kind of thing that happens in terms of organic promotion on Amazon, because there's a lot of different things happening with all the different algorithms and how they recommend books. But it also has to do with the fact that typically after 30 days, we don't tend to be shouting out the rooftops about our books because we've published them already. We've told everybody about them. And so it starts to feel like a little bit too much if we're still promoting. So I can't say whether that is necessarily just a factor of Amazon or a factor of us not promoting, or a combination of both, which is probably what it is more likely than not. But that doesn't mean that your book can't jump up in the ranks and do well a year later or 2 years later. And again, I have sold more books in that beach series this year. I've had 2 book bubs, but even without those, I've sold more copies this year because I got new covers, because I had a little bit more to invest now than I did at the very beginning when I launched them. So all of this to say, you can do a big splash book launch. You can do a LowKey book launch. You can do identical things. It's just spreading out over time. You can bootstrap a big book launch. You can bootstrap a LowKey book launch. You can pour a ton of money into both kinds of book launches. You need to think about where you are in your author career, your overall goals, the money you have to invest, the time, the frequency of publishing. But you need to realize overall that your launch failing or being a success, it doesn't mean that your book is going to tank overall. It doesn't mean that your book is not valuable. It doesn't mean either if it succeeds and then all of a sudden you have all this disappointment when a few months later it's like, my book's not selling anymore. Your books are assets that we should be all the time advertising, all the time promoting in paid and organic ways, because we are building something bigger than just one single book launch. So if nothing else, I want to leave you with encouragement that there's not just one way to do this. You can test and try and see what works for your particular case, considering these different factors, considering your mental state and all of these things, because I do think that is really important. And I will say that I have seen a lot of success, and I have almost always done the more low-key launches. And, that's just for my mental state, for my publishing schedule and all those kinds of things. It helps me not freak out. It doesn't mean I'm any less excited about my books, but I've also seen over time how they've continued to be assets and how I can continue to invest in older books, and they are always there as something that can be making money for you. So, book launching. If you want the show notes with some of the links, like to the Writing Gals YouTube video on this, you can go to creativewriting.com/192 for episode 192. Again, if you want to join the creative writing community, you can go to creativewriting.com/community. And if you want my weekly emails that have helpful posts like links to these podcast episodes and other things that I find so that you don't have to spend all your time searching for information and news on self-publishing, you can get it just delivered to your inbox. You can go to creativewriting.com/quickfix to sign up for that. A huge thank you to Jasmine Commerce of JasmineCommerceMusic.com for the music you are now hearing for the show, which is lovely, and she's an independent artist, so I'd highly recommend supporting her. She's also just a lovely person. Okay, so I've given you options, big launches, low-key launches, and given you permission to fail your launch and still know you're not a failure and your book is valuable and amazing and can make you money for years to come. Be encouraged. Launch how you want to launch. So now it's time for you to go out and create content that you love and serve your people well.